Hey, Amber.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm good.
Enjoying the sunshine?
I am. I love the sunshine.
Yeah.
Sun's the best.
Me too. It's a little cold here for me.
Cold? It's going to be cold tomorrow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, everybody. Welcome to our class. I hope that you had a chance to post, and I see that some of you did. I don't know if everybody had a chance to respond to everyone else or other people, but I appreciate the posts. I appreciate your engagement with the question of religious pluralism. We've gone over several points in this course. We're moving toward the conclusion of the course, and as we do that, we're looking at Marjorie's book, Marjorie Suchocki, her book on Divinity and Diversity. And I like using this book particularly not just because it's asking us questions about religious pluralism, which I think are important things for us to reflect upon and think about. How do we understand the relationship between Christianity and other worldviews, and particularly other religions, some of which make claims that are very different than the claims that we might make, some of which make claims that are fairly similar, but they get there in different ways. But also because what Suchocki does in this book is almost like a mini systematic, like she's going to talk about the different elements that are in a typical system of theology. So she's going to talk a little bit about, first she's going to bring us into the dialogue or the questions, discussion about religious pluralism, and what do we mean by religious pluralism, and what are the different ways in which we can think about religious pluralism and understand it. But then she's going to talk a little bit about what do we mean by creation? What is the tradition said about who God is, and how does creation occur, or why do we think God is our creator? Then we're also going to, she also then talks a lot about this creation. We are created in the image of God, and what could the image of God mean? So we will look a little bit at the way that has been understood in the history of Christianity, mostly from Augustine, who was does anybody know who Augustine is? Anybody heard of Augustine? Okay, Zach. He was a 4th, 5th century bishop who really became almost an official church doctrine. He lived in Hippo, which is in Africa, northern Africa. So he was African, but he also was in Rome for a while. And he was there during the fall of Rome, which one can only imagine the absolute destruction of having not just your town be destroyed by, or not that a hurricane, and not like, Katrina wasn't a horrible disaster, but also the whole empire was destroyed, upended. And having run from Rome with some of his parishioners into Africa, into Hippo, what an experience, and how to, really an experience of pastoral care, and how to think theologically in the midst of that, which I think in some ways the United States is in a turmoil, in a situation of turmoil and change. And how do we as religious leaders help folks not just go crazy, right? We deal with and have some level of awareness of God's presence with us through with this difficult time, but also how do we rebuild and visualize and imagine how the world can be different, how God is still present in the world with us, and how can we express that, our theology and our faith, in ways that are consistent with God's loving work in the midst of disaster and reevaluating, restructuring. some of the things that people thought were as normative, or at least nothing is going to change it, right? So now we've got to restructure or re-understand how do we live in a new world with new ideas and new meaning systems. So Augustine is really a powerful father, not a call him a father, but a church leader, and very much more practically based than some folks think of him. Aquinas is more of the theologian in the church. I mean, in the library, writing in a time when it isn't so crazy. But we will look at a little bit at what each of them has to say. Both of them are deeply influenced by the full philosophical assumptions and systems of their time. And who'd we lose?
Adrian.
I was like, where did Adrian go? Did I lose her? Is she in the other thing? Nope, that's it. Okay. We also don't have James either, but anyway, hopefully they'll join us soon. So what Suchocki's doing then is taking a look at what the tradition has said and understood about what does this image of God mean, and how can we then expand the way we understand that in such a way that we can talk about religious pluralism, we can talk about plural or diverse images of who God is, both in terms of within Christianity, which Dr. Frankie shared quite a bit about thinking about those questions and issues within Christianity, and also naming the way in which the Christian scriptures, both the Hebrew Bible and the Gospels and letters, really do have a diversity and pluralism embedded within them. They make claims that sometimes are different from each other. Sometimes they're inconsistent, but most of the time they're different. And how do we put those things together, or how do we allow and engage for those differences and diversities? But then also, then she's going to talk about, do something similar that I've been describing in this notion of creation and image of God, when she's going to talk about redemption. She's going to talk about how we understand sin and how God's presence, Jesus's life, and crucifixion and resurrection are related to that. She said she lost her connection. I hope she's coming back. Okay, and then she's also going to talk about, for next week, and you all have part of that, as some of you are in which groups. I don't know which groups you're in, but you guys do. You all do. Anyway, so we'll hear more about those things coming up. But the emphasis, or the point I'm trying to make, is simply that while this book is making an argument or a way of thinking about Christianity that can have an integrity about its own claims. So we have a Christianity that has integrous claims, and yet makes those claims in a context in which other religious ideas and ideals can also make claims in integrous ways. And we can have a conversation. Were you all disappearing on me?
Zach had said he has connection issues today.
Yeah. Oh, well, that's crazy. Anyway, so that's my point, right? So this is what the context is of why we're studying this, and why I think that the book not only brings up these important questions about pluralism and how we understand what truth is and how we name that. We talked about that last time with Dr. Frankie, and I'll talk about that again in a little bit. But also how that can be expressed, or no, how we can then express the norms of what our religion is, how can we understand Christianity, and what Christianity's insights are, and what Christianity's questions are, and the various answers that Christianity has given. How can we do that in a context and an awareness that there are other questions and other answers that other communities and cultures and times places are doing. Okay, that's my big introduction. So hopefully Adrian will join us again. But until then, we're going to go ahead and, well, not until then, but between now and then, perhaps, we're going to go ahead and take a few moments and be calm and breathe. I have a quote for us. I'm going to ask you to reflect upon this quote. It's by this gentleman here that's looking at us, who's kind of cute. But anyway, Ibo Patel. And the quote is, the question of how people orient around religion differently or interact with each other, whether that be based on conflict or cooperation, will be one of the most engaging questions of the 21st century. So go ahead and take a few moments to orient yourself and go ahead and close your eyes, attend to your breath. Let's go ahead and come back into our space, our shared space. So as we begin this presentation or begin this lecture, I have a PowerPoint that you've got to see, and I also have made some handouts, which we don't hand out anymore because we're on Zoom, so I'm not sure what you call those. Zoom outs. I have some Zoom outs that I posted on the Populi for you as well. That asked some good questions, I think, would help also try to help direct your reading of this text, which I think if you don't have any sense of process theology, there can be a little bit of a learning curve. But I think once you have a little bit of that, I think it's one of the simplest and yet full discussions of process theology for people studying religion or people studying Christianity. So Suchocki makes the point that there's a variety of ways of being religious. And that raises the question of what's the nature of truth? Is it one? Is it knowable? Is there one capital T and we're all little t's trying to get to it? Or is, as I suggested last time in conversation with Dr. Franke, is capital T truth more relational? In other words, there is a capital T truth, but it is known only in the context of relationships with that which is divine and with each other. I think that's an important question for us to reflect upon as we go through this book, but also as you go through your seminary time and your ministry. What do we do with somebody who has a different understanding of God, different understanding of truth than we do? Or what if we have a different understanding than we used to? How do we describe or explain the differences? Is it us who's changed? Is it God has changed? The world's changed? What's changed? Now, Christian history has favored the idea from long ago, from Cyprian, that there's no salvation outside the church. But the question I have, because Christianity also has affirmed from time long ago that Jesus Christ's salvific work has universal impact. It changes the very ontology of what it means to be human. So clearly, if Jesus's life and death and resurrection and teachings change what it means to be human, then that impact has greater significance than just for the church. Or is it that God's presence, whether Jesus Christ is a symbol for Christians, or whether the notion of God being incarnate in the world is ontologically universal? Just reflecting upon that, it impacts, I think, how you understand who God is. And okay, Zach, talk to me later. Yes, you'll have to remind me of that. So he's asked, well, I don't know if it's for everybody, he's asked me a question about a book in process theology. I think this is really a good book in process theology because it's so focused on church, but it depends on what you want to do with process theology. So then the question is, how do we engage with persons whose religion is different than us? I asked you to reflect a little bit about that on the discussion starter. So, and I don't know if there's any other discussion. I know some of you had some really good posts and some nice responses. Does anybody want to share that? Share those? So I'm asking you to share those things. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to continue talking for just a second because there is some discussion in the faculty, at the faculty meeting that I had this morning about the value of those kinds of asynchronistic interactions like discussion posts. So some folks think they're just useless. Some folks think that's what classes should be all like that. Asynchronistic kind of interactions. And I'm wondering, because you had 4 or 5 of them, do you find, I think when I read them, I think you're saying, in the most part, each of you is having something to say that's quite interesting and helpful. And the interactions, the responses from each other, I think are both sensitive and you've read them and you've reflected upon them with some depth and not just off the top of your head, but actually thinking about it and wondering, oh, this helps me understand it in this way. Is this a helpful technology, for lack of a better word, for your learning?
Hi, it's so good to be back with you all. I missed y'all last week. I would say, Dr. Russell, I really appreciate the use of discussion in your class and how we use them. And I think the discussion boards do provide some benefit, but sometimes they're used excessively, in my opinion. And then I feel like I'm doing it just to do it for, like points or credit. But what I like most when it comes to discussion in your class is the time that we get in small groups to really discuss and flesh out our ideas and, like clarify our ideas, process our ideas, engage with our classmates. And that to me is more valuable than on the discussion board. But I do appreciate them to, the discussion board to also, like process your thoughts through writing and being able to engage in that way. So I like the balance that we have.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much, Terea. And in your opinion, so I think we've had 5, or this maybe is the 5th one or 4th one. You think that's about right? Maybe somewhere between 4 and 5?
I have to agree with her. Your discussion board, I'm not a fan of them at all, in general, because they feel much more impersonal. But as far as in the classes, yours are the best because we have, as a class, they are, because I mean, the other class and some of the other classes, we do them like every week, but we haven't actually had time to spend any time with the students. And in this class, at least I know when I'm responding to Jackie, who Jackie is. So I feel like there's a connection and it's not just another paper I'm reading. But a ton of them is just more reading and writing. It's not a personal connection like this class is. But I mean, more than 4 is just like, oh, it's just more reading and writing. I'm reading just another thing out of a book at that point for me. Not a fan that way, but you do it better with the fact that we are connected as a class with in-class discussions that go along.
That's very helpful as I'm planning for next semester. Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you. We have a surprise visitor. So you've probably seen the PowerPoint that I've shown, but we have a surprise visitor, and turn on your camera. There's Marjorie. So this is Marjorie Suchocki.
Hi, Helene. Hello, class.
Hi, Marjorie. It's nice that you're joining us from Dallas, right? Or you're near, well, we won't tell them the name of the city that you're in, which seems like, yeah, but it's near Dallas.
It's near Dallas, right?
Yeah. I'm so glad you're here. It's wonderful. We're reading your book, Divinity and Diversity.
I remember that.
And so I have a question for you. Would you rather me just continue to go through the PowerPoint, and then if people have questions, you could answer them, or would you like to give a little blurb beforehand and say, here's why you decided to write this book? Or what's your preference?
Well, I haven't read the book for a long time. So, but I've thought about the issue for a long time. And yeah. I don't know if I did this in the book, I must have, but it was long ago, I can't remember. The importance for me for diversity, the biggest argument for diversity is the Christian understanding of God as omnipresent. We have said there are 3 characteristics of God. And of course, always we bow down to omnipotence because we love might and power and guns and explosives and all that sort of thing. And then we've said God is omniscient, which means God knows everything, which gives a lot of problems when you think of the problem of evil. And finally, we've said that God is omnipresent, but we've not paid any attention to that part of it because it doesn't seem to matter. I think it's the most important of the 3. That omniscience is, well, if it means God knows the future, I don't think that's correct. And if it, as far as omnipotence, if that means God has all the power there is, I don't think that's correct either. But as for God's presence, I'm absolutely certain that if there is a God, God must be present everywhere at all times. Now we say that God reveals God's self, and that revelation is in the form of Jesus Christ within a particular culture, and it spread through other cultures over 2,000 years. And that seems right. But to me, it would be absolutely idiotic to think that God, who is omnipresent, only once decides to reveal anything important about God's self to a people. So if you really take omnipresence seriously, then God must be present in all the religions of the world, even though the religions are different. And so then you say, well, do they have anything in common? And there is one thing in common. They all value kindness. And it might be that kindness becomes a key to understanding the mercy and graciousness of the God we know in Jesus Christ. But I have a Buddhist daughter-in-law, and I'll tell you there's something really important about her religion. It's kindness and compassion. It's foremost. And when I read the Buddhist literature, because I used to teach world religions, I remember one, it was in the Lotus Sutras. It was a story about the Buddha not despising, which said that God does not despise anyone, and therefore we should not despise anyone either, which is a way of expressing kindness. And if you look at the Quran too emphasizes kindness. And yes, there are terrorists. Well, guess what? There are terrorist Christians too. Does that invalidate Christianity? Hardly. Well, what about terrorists within Muslim? Does that disinherit? I mean, does that throw just Islam off into the nearest garbage heap? Not if you've read the Quran seriously or interacted seriously with Muslim groups. We used to have a group called Muslims and Methodists back in California. And now we have a choir in the Methodist Church, and many times we have met with the, it was the Mormon Church actually, not the, to have Christmas carol concerts together. Anyhow, I think there are many ways of being religious, and it's not that one is right and the others are wrong. It may be that one is right for you, but that doesn't mean it has to be right for everyone. I think the omnipresence of God requires an affirmation that God is present in all religions, and we better pay attention to that. That's my opening and closing statement.
I love it. So does anybody have any questions about that, or any questions? I mean, we haven't gone through the book in depth in terms of the lecture yet, but if anybody has any questions for Marjorie before we do that, feel free to ask.
Who are you anyhow?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Let's everybody just introduce yourself, say your name and something that happened to you interesting or you did interesting this week. Oh, I'm sorry. Jackie, will you begin?
I'm Jackie McDonald. I'm in my third semester, and something interesting. I have a 5-year-old, and we spent a lot of time working on a dollhouse this weekend. I don't know that doesn't seem appropriate for a theology class, but that's just.
You spent a lot of time on a dollhouse this weekend?
Yes.
Far out, fantastic. How come you did that?
My dad made like a 6-cube shelf thing, and we've been working on crafts and carpet and wallpaper and things to kind of make it a custom dollhouse.
Oh, well, I did that long ago in my past. My husband and I made a huge dollhouse for our 2 daughters one Christmas. And I made the braided rugs and wallpapered it, and made curtains. I know what you mean. It's a wonderful piece of work. Your kids will enjoy it, and your grandkids will forever.
Thank you.
And even the great grandkids.
Hopefully it's a very long time before I face grandchildren, but thank you.
But anyhow, nice activity.
Thank you, and thank you for your book. I'll have a couple questions when we get back to that.
Oh, great. Marjorie, do you still have the dollhouse?
Actually, it's where is it now? It's gravitated through the daughter type grandchildren, and so now I think my great granddaughter has it.
Okay, that's good. I remember being at your house with in California and taking a picture with Tangelo in it, because Tangelo's just.
That's right. That's right. Well, now it's Abby's.
All right, wonderful. Adrian?
First, can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I am on my phone because computer things, technology is doing what it does. My name's Adrienne Lacey, and this is my first semester in the MDiv program at CTS. And the most interesting thing that I did this weekend was survive my homework.
Congratulations on making it through.
Thank you. It
Good
was so
luck
intense.
for your future.
Thank you.
Glad to meet you, Adrian.
Me
Adrian
too.
also did the yoga training, so
Oh, well, that
Yes.
gets you an A automatically.
but you also have a sense of the diversity within the yoga understanding of truth and practice. So, anyway, thank you, Mary Beth.
I am Mary Beth Mullen. And first of all, my pastor, Reverend Rebecca Zielinski, is going to be so jealous that you're on. She is a big fan of yours and speaks highly of your work. And the most interesting thing I did this week is actually with one of our church members. Her husband a year ago was stopped by the police and was shot 6 times, and his trial was this week. And we as a church, they have 5 children, and she couldn't be in the courtroom, and we just thought it was a lot for her to go through that alone. So we as a church set up so that it could live stream into the church, and we all spent time with her and the kids and went through the trial with them. And unfortunately, even though 4 of the police officers admitted that they lied about what happened, he was found guilty and none of them had charges brought against them. So it's been a week.
Horrible. That's just horrible. In this country, I don't know.
Yeah, it's been a week.
So sorry. I'm
Too
so
many
sorry.
times they get away with murder. We're waiting on the Minnesota one. Anyhow,
Yeah.
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 That was a hard weekend.
Zach.
There. Can everybody hear me? I was having connection issues as well.
Yes.
Okay, great. It is such an honor to be on the call with you, Dr. Suchocki. My wife is very jealous at the moment. I'm trying to think of an interesting thing. I had my second shot last week, so I didn't do anything last week. I was trying to stay awake to work through this awesome book that you wrote, but incidentally, I'm also trying to work through one of the chapters you wrote for Christian Perfection, Wesley's Christian Perfection as well, because I got that book not too long ago and was wanting to work through it with the church that I'm pastoring.
Yep. Marjorie is also a United Methodist.
Wesley is my favorite theologian, even better than John Cobb.
I was gonna say even better than John Cobb because we watched that video where you said that. So
yeah, I love the practicality of John Wesley. That
Yeah.
unlike most theologians, he did his on horseback while he was going to be with the people, and he always had the church in mind, and he always had ordinary Christians in mind. He was not an armchair theologian. He was a practical theologian, and I value that about him. And I thought a plain account of Christian perfection, I thought it was too bad it was hard for people to get through, because I thought it was the most important thing he wrote.
Mhm.
Anyhow, and I still think that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, thank you for that.
Wonderful. Terea.
Hello.
I came
I'm
when you were talking.
I'm Terea. It's so good to have you on our call today. Thank you for joining us. And this weekend, I hosted a bridal shower for my friend with her other bridesmaids. And so we got to celebrate our sister and our friend in this new chapter of her life. So
What a delight.
that was good.
What a delight. What a contrast.
Wonderful. James, can you turn your camera on too for us? As long as you're clothed.
And I am clothed, but I can't turn my camera on right now. I'm sorry. But I am James Rogers. I am a second semester MDiv student. And the most exciting thing I did this weekend, I think, was I watched service and have a deep discussion with some of my other friends in the young adult ministry, and just kind of the things that we're planning on doing in the coming weeks, because we have an event coming up. So we kind of got fired up about some of the things that were mentioned and how it related to some of our goals for this this month.
Good work.
Thank you. Thank you. And Amber?
Hi, I'm Amber Good. I'm sixth semester MDiv MTS student and the TA for the class. And I'm glad also to be able to meet you. I too enjoyed Diversity and Divinity when I read it during the intro to theology.
Thank you.
Oh, and the most important or interesting thing, we had a wildflower walk this past Sunday, and it was beautiful weather. It was lovely.
Oh, just beautiful. I came home from a week in Arizona. I got home Friday night, I guess. And to my surprise, all of the irises in front of my house were in full bloom, and they were so beautiful. Now, they're not exactly wildflowers, but anyhow. And Arizona was wonderful. What a time of year in Arizona. We were down in Tucson, and there were the Serrero cacti all over the place. Oh, it's just wonderful. Very different from Texas or Indiana. Is that the class?
That is the class. I am Helene Russell, and I went to a play at the Fringe this weekend with some friends, and so the Fringe is downtown, Indie Fringe, and she has set it up. Pauline, the former director, she's just retired for the third time because we keep getting her to come back. But anyway, she's set it up. I mean, it's been going on throughout the pandemic, where you're in your table or your chairs and you're separated, your group is separated from everyone else, people wear masks. And for some reason, when they built the Fringe, they added on to the French theater several years ago, they decided it would be a good idea to make the one theater have like a garage door in the back all the way up. So the people who are acting are actually in the garage. I mean, they're in the theater with all the electricity and everything, and we can see them out. We can be outside and see them. Anyway, it was a delightful play written by the woman who was starring in it, and it was called Honk. And it's going to sound funny, and I had no idea what it was about. I just said to my friend, she said, "You want to go to Diva Fest?" I said, "Sure." And it was about a goose.
Oh, of course.
So many words, right? It was about a goose that falls in love with this guy that works there, and then he falls in, and he can understand her, and it was just so sweet. It was so funny because she, of course,
it was a fairy tale.
How geese can be with other people. She liked him, but she hated everybody else. Anyway, and the woman that played the goose, it was just hilarious. It was delightful. Anyway.
It would be right up your alley.
Topic and one might say a gift of the Holy Spirit, to be invited to something that was exactly what my heart needed.
Of course, how marvelous. Well, I appreciate all your weekends. It's lovely to hear about them.
Yes, it's very nice to have you with us, Marjorie, and I appreciate everybody sharing a little bit of themselves personally as well. I would like, if people have questions, I mean, I'm open to going through the PowerPoint, but I'm also open to people asking questions that Marjorie is here. And I don't know, Marjorie, what your time frame is like, if you want to stay and watch the PowerPoint, or if you want to just answer some questions now.
How long is the class?
It goes until 4, but we will take.
Nope, I can't do that.
Take a break at 2:30, and then we'll have we'll have some other things happening. So we'll go until probably 2:15, 2:30,
Okay.
which
Actually, yes.
which is an hour different from where you are.
Right, that's right. I'll stay on for another half hour. Use it as you like.
Okay. Well, how about my guess is that some folks had an opportunity to take a look at both the handout that is a Zoom out, as well as maybe the PowerPoint. But do you have questions for Marjorie while she's with us? It sounded like Jackie might have had a question.
I'm working on the kind of the outline for the final paper, which is partly like, who are we? What are we to do? Who is God? Answering some of those questions. And in the section on what are we to do, I'm thinking that from reading your book, my takeaway is that we're to create a community that shows love to all diversity and all religions. And I feel like I can do that somewhat well in the workplace when I'm a leader at the workplace. But in the church, when I've explained, hey, we went to a monastery and I had a great experience and this is what I took away, the people were like, whoa, we don't talk about that. We don't engage with other religions. And I'm wondering
Really?
what some of like your first steps are in.
Well, what about the massacre you just had with the Sikhs? Wasn't that in Indianapolis?
Yeah,
Where the guy went into a FedEx office and killed about 8 people, half of whom were of the Sikh religion. Wasn't that Indianapolis?
It was, yeah.
Well, wouldn't compassion suggest that one thing your community might do is reach out to the Sikh community in their grief and sorrow and offer to be with them in some way, help them, if you could, or just be a presence with?
It seems like a great point and a timely point.
Yeah. Compassion is maybe, as I said, possibly a universal value in all religions. I mean, for the church just to express its condolences or somehow to be present with them in their grief might be the best opportunity for an Indianapolis church to begin to think about how other people feel and think and worship God in maybe ways that are different from the way we do. But if you think God is universal, then maybe God has something to do with how they worship. Maybe that's how God led them, which doesn't mean how God leads us is invalid. Just look for the commonalities.
Sure, that's a great one.
And not to be converted. You don't want to convert to Sikhism, nor do you expect the Sikhs to convert to Christianity, but to be friends, to be community, to acknowledge one another, and not hide behind religious walls. It must be a fairly small community. It must have been devastating for them because there had to be some rationale that 4 of them happened to be, it just happened to be Sikh, or was the deranged who went in and decided to kill everybody he could? Was he seeking them out, or was it just happenstance? Either way, they're dead. Either way, the community is in grief and feeling alienated from the larger society. Maybe you could break through that alienation and show compassion and care in a time of grief.
that's a great idea, Marjorie. Thank you. Yeah. From what I understand, it was because there are a lot of Sikh persons who are Sikh that are living in that general area. There's a community there near where the UPS, no, the Federal X,
FedEx, yeah.
Yep, FedEx is, and so he wasn't targeting them as Sikhs. He was just targeting them because they were there. And
nonetheless, the Sikh community is in deep grief.
Yeah,
and it's good that he wasn't targeting them, that it was happenstance that they were, but it's not happenstance that they're dead.
Yeah.
And that the community is in grief, and compassion would be timely. Sometimes people bring food. Maybe there are different Sikh foods, so that wouldn't be appropriate. But you know how we act to our neighbors and friends when they're in grief. We give them some kind of presence, and the church could do that.
Thank you, Marjorie. Anyone else have any questions from what you were reading, or from the question of religious pluralism or diversity?
What have you found to be the biggest reason people are so hesitant to connect with other people of other faiths?
I think we get too locked into our own way of thinking, and a sense that, of course, we're right. Well, if we're right, then others must be wrong. This is a stupid way to think from my point of view. But I mean, we kind of get locked into who we are. Look how we get locked into our politics, which is so stupid. We even politicize a virus. I mean, we're crazy. And it's hard to break through that, whether in political realities or religious reality. We build walls around us. And even we put stained glass windows in the windows, and they were there and originally for a purpose. They were teaching purposes. Those stained glass windows came about in an illiterate society, same with mosaics. And it was a way of teaching the gospel to the congregations, because they could read windows or they could read mosaics, but nonetheless, you can't see through them. You can see the pretty colors outside, but you can't really see through them. Well, maybe we need less pretty windows and more glass windows or something that we can, and then maybe even open them so that we can not just surround ourselves with our bricks and our mortar and our glass, be it stained or otherwise, but like that play she went to, that you went to, Helene. The play was done on a stage with all the lights, but it was open to the universe outside. And so you could go and be safe. Well, maybe our churches could learn something and be a little more open, just to share the compassion and generosity of God. And rather than think that we're an island and only God can speak to our island and no other islands, which is stupid when you stop to think about it, that God must be at work in that religion too. Why don't we try to find out how? Just scary.
Yeah, we have a really big yard, All Saints does, and we've been known to do a lot of little things outside. I mean, we were doing things outside before the pandemic, but now we're doing them even more so. We did for Holy Week, we had lots of services. They were smaller outside, but we had that big yard in front of Day Spring. I don't know if anybody's ever been down there.
Good. That's
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
And as more of us get vaccinated, now everybody can be vaccinated, right? Are you all vaccinated now? Yes, of course. Oh,
You
thank
are.
you, God.
Everybody's vaccinated. Yeah.
We can actually begin to mingle. You can actually have a group of vaccinated people from different religions meeting and talking about their experiences of the pandemic and how God helped or didn't help as they went through it. Oh, I need to share with you my stuff with the Psalms. I've been reading the Psalms over and over again, and I think they're crazy. At first, when I first started reading them, I thought, these aren't even Christian. Well, of course, why should they be? They're in the Hebrew Bible. But I mean, all that vengeance and stuff that we never include in our church readings, but they're there in the Psalms, read Psalm 137. It starts out so beautifully and it ends up asking God to send somebody to take the Babylonian children and dash their heads against the stones. Now, really, is that Christian? But the Psalms are really interesting for a pandemic, because what they are is the absolute honesty of the psalmist who dares to express feelings that may not even be.
I think she meant to say that might not even be something they're actually praying for, because we've had that discussion. Marjorie, are you frozen? Are you back yet? Marjorie? I don't know where she went. But we've had this discussion. So we were talking about how one of the values of the Psalms is to be able to talk about how all human feelings are human feelings, right? They're the things that are written in the Psalms really are expressing human feelings. And I don't know if the psalm writer was actually praying for that or was actually expressing such anger and hurt. So, I mean, I wouldn't write a sermon or suggest anybody to preach about doing that. But it is a way, in some ways, of expressing to God one's anger and frustration, and allowing God to hear it rather than trying to hide it. I mean, everybody's had those kinds of feelings, however you express them, but you have some feelings that maybe aren't so, as we would say, godly. But the point is that no, all the feelings are godly. God is aware of all of them and can be present with all of them. Doesn't mean that God's going to enable such things to happen. Does that make sense? So I don't know what's happened to Marjorie. I don't know if she's coming back or not. She hasn't said anything, but I thought that would be a nice treat just to have her pop in and say hello. And so I appreciate us spending the time to you all introduce yourselves to her. And she's a dear, dear friend, and she's really old. I mean, she would say that herself, like she's in her 80s, like upper 80s. She might not look like she's in her upper 80s, but she is. And Tangela even came to say hello. Yes, Jackie, do you have a question?
I appreciate you having her on, because sometimes like you read, I read this book and I was like, oh my goodness, I'm never going to know all this. Like, this is so complicated. And I think of these like complicated people writing it, and she seems so human. So now I want to reread it thinking of her as a grandmother. And I think that it'll come across softer. So thank you for that, for her coming on.
Oh, here she comes back. Well, thank you. And thank you for enjoying her. There's Marjorie. Well, how is everybody doing about everything else? I mean, so you have your schedules figured out for what you're going to do for next week? Does everybody have a sense of that? Yes, no, maybe? Yes, okay. All right.
Regarding the presentation?
Yeah, for your presentation, I just wanted to make sure there's any questions. Well, I'm not sure if how Marjorie's coming on or not coming on. So what I'm going to do, actually, is there any other questions before we start? Marjorie, if you can hear me, I'm going to start the I'm going to start the presentation. You can always text me if you can't figure out how to get. Oh, there you are. You're on mute, so you need to unmute yourself. That's
There.
better.
Okay, I'm sorry for that diatribe, but evidently it was just so strange that it just cut me off. Anyhow, that's all right. But you're about ready to go into the rest of your meeting. Is there anything else you want to talk about that I should hang in for, or shall I just hang up?
Any other questions for Marjorie?
I thank you all for your attention to this book, and I thank you even more if you reach out to the communities around you and begin to learn something about other religions appreciatively and compassionately. Thank you very much for your presence and for reading my book. That's very nice of you.
Thank you, Marjorie.
Goodbye.
Goodbye, dear. So here is our PowerPoint. If you have questions, you need to speak because I'm not sure I can see your hand or anything, okay? So Divinity and Diversity by Marjorie Suchocki. As you might have guessed by now, Marjorie was my dissertation advisor and we've become fast friends, and I visit her when there isn't a pandemic. I visit her probably once a year or once every other year. She's a process theologian. You already saw a picture of her because you got to meet her. And process theology is based on Whitehead's book, what we talked a little bit about last time. So it's process and reality. Remember, I talked about how there are things that are real and there are things that are in process. So the universe is both in process and has some consistency in the values such as creation, redemption, rebirth, sanctification, and creative transformation. God is processive, incarnate and relational, not a static or separate reality. God is more than us, but God is also connected to us, and we are connected to God, I should say. Just making sure the bird's not doing anything weird. Or she can do weird things, just not dangerous things. We, all of us, including the bird and the plants, are relational beings. We are related to all other entities. And that relationship is not only external, as in, I'm 10 feet away from my neighbor who is just watering his plants, but I'm also, and I'm related to you all via the internet, some of whom I have met in person at different times, but also we are internally related, which means that I am constituted and you are constituted by those relations. They make us who we are. In other words, you make me who I am. I make you who you are, among other realities and factors. So we're constituted by relations, and we're deeply impacted thus by what others do and others' presence and others' values. We are one in the sense of unity when we are many in the sense of the complexity. Now, religious pluralism, it has a long history, and early on, and you all have had church, well, some of you have had church history, so you have a sense of the dramatic and not always clear and uprightness of the history of Christianity and how Christianity came to affirm what it affirms in the Nicene Creed. And so you have a sense of it's not like everybody agreed without being forced to agree. There was some force in that agreement when and there was some extra pressure upon those who didn't agree to have something to agree in whatever way they could agree, or they wouldn't be a part of the church anymore. And this is where you have the claim that there's no salvation outside of the church. So that was part of the argument that was given for the creation of heresy. I don't mean the creation of the heretics, but rather the importance of the notion that there are heretics, and here's what orthodoxy is, and here's outside of that are the people that are wrong. And so they are called, they're not just called wrong and heretics, they're also condemned. And often early Christianity it included other religions as being wrong. And even Middle Ages in Christianity, other religions were wrong. In some ways, it was almost there was a race to get the most people. Like people who were of different religions were often persecuted and told they have to agree with the people who are in charge with their religion, and were forced then to either convert or be exiled, or were tortured or killed. So nowadays, in Christianity doesn't have those extreme measures, but other religions may still have those in different countries. But there are still people who have a notion of Christianity as being exclusively correct, that other religions and people who disagree with that, with the official church doctrine, are wrong. Maybe they're going to hell. Maybe they shouldn't be part of your church. Maybe they shouldn't be part of the communion. They're excommunicated. But that's one way of thinking about the relationship between Christianity and other religions. Another way is inclusivism. Now, inclusivism can be understood in a couple different ways. Usually it means that persons of other religion who make claims that aren't exactly what Christianity is making are still saved or still part of the universal community because they've been baptized by desire or they've been baptized in this hidden work of Christ. Sometimes that's the way that Christians have engaged with persons of goodwill that don't affirm any doctrines of Christianity. And sometimes it's a way in which other persons of other religions can be included in the universal salvation, even if they aren't affirming Christ. So they might not know that they are desiring Christ, but they are desiring the same kind of values. Then there's a third option, and within each of these there's varying degrees. The third option is pluralism. And that pluralism is the affirmation that other religions can be means of salvation or liberation or healing on their own terms. So this pluralism is one in which differences, religious claims that are different, are respected. Sometimes they're respected as you have your views and I have my views, but we can agree on the problems that are basically human problems, and that these issues need to be addressed in ways that are constructive. Sometimes it's based on what we all, as Marjorie was focusing on in her discussion here, it's based on, kindness as something, we come up with a common value or a common way of treating other people, or of holding each other in with prayers of well-being. There's also the notion that so John Hick talks about this in his version of pluralism, where every religion or religious paradigm has a notion of the real, whatever the real might be. So for Christians, the real might be Jesus or the Trinity. For Jews, it might be God. For Muslims, it may be Allah. For Buddhists, it might be freedom from suffering, the Buddha who enables us to be free from suffering. So there's a variety of different, the real doesn't have to be an entity. Does that make sense? So now there's problems of religious pluralism, and this is, and we haven't gotten to Marjorie's argument just yet in the book. It sounds like her argument has softened a bit, but at any rate, so the problems of religious pluralism is that it can easily fall into relativism. So for example, people might just say, well, all religions are equally right or equally at getting at the truth. And that can be problematic because some religions affirm some things that are pretty difficult for other religions to affirm. Sometimes the things that are affirmed in one religion are maybe not the core of that religion, but they have become important in the way that religion is practiced. An example of that is sexism or practices that are sexist. For example, Orthodox Christianity doesn't think that women or gay people can be ordained. They're not as fully human, I guess, as male people. Sorry about that. There's just noise. I live downtown, so there's been a lot of that today, this morning. Yeah, there's a, can you still hear me? Yeah, okay. So the problems of religious pluralism is it can easily fall into relativism. There's no way then to adjudicate truth or value, because if we're making an argument of different religions, we're talking about different religions having a kind of equal footing in terms of their value, how do you make a decision just as I did? I made a value claim about the way that women or gay people are treated in another religion. So how do I make that claim with something that's transcendent to both religions? So that can be a difficult issue. And sometimes we're not able to make content claims about divinity, because that's often where our understandings, people's understandings of religion are different. You know, what is divinity like? Is divinity touchable? I mean, Christians are talking about Jesus as being a symbol of God that has flesh and blood, whereas Jews would say you can't. God does not have flesh and blood like we have flesh and blood, and so that could be seen as idolatrous. Or Buddhism doesn't have a notion. I mean, Buddha is not God, right? But so there is, you know, it's more of an absence of an entity. Another way of approaching questions of religious pluralism and how do we address different claims of different religions is that we could focus on justice issues, right? Or we can focus on love and kindness, and thus we avoid the truth claims and the questions of whose truth is correct or closer to correct. But then the focus is no longer religious. And this is Paul Nitter's argument. Another way of thinking about it is that we can focus on the commonalities of different religions, as Marjorie is doing in the discussion we had just now about focusing on kindness. And kindness is a great thing to focus on, but it kind of waters down the real differences among the religious ideals and the religious stories. I have an idea that isn't in this PowerPoint, but it might be interesting for us to think about the stories. And in some ways, the stories are different, of course, but all religions have some kinds of stories, religious myths or stories that tell us or share with us some way in which religious ideals have been expressed in an ideal way. That would be an interesting way of thinking about it as well, that we can share each other's stories. And it's one of the things that we did when I was teaching about religious pluralism, when I was teaching at Allegheny College, which is in Pennsylvania years and years and years ago, is to talk about the importance of the stories and how stories can be similar or different from one religion to another. But the stories tell us something about who we are, and they do it in a way that is deeper than our rational claims. Here's an image from an interreligious or interfaith dialogue that happened a while ago that I just wanted to share. There's here we've got the Archbishop of Canterbury, we've got Jonathan Sachs, who's a rabbi, we have the Grand Mufti of Bosnia, and then we have Jim Wallace of Sojourners. And I just thought it was an interesting sort of symbol of that. So now, Suchocki talks about John Cobb, and this little flower have symbols of different religions, in case you're wondering what that is. And Adrian knows what this one is. Om, yes. And some of you know what some of the other ones are as well, but it's neat to think of this as a flower. I mean, I think it fits kind of what Suchocki's idea is, that we are one earth and we have persons who are worshiping in a variety of different ways, and taken together, we make a beautiful flower. I mean, the flower with just one petal isn't as beautiful as a flower with lots of petals. And actually, you know, I saw this really interesting flower. Let me see if I can, let me see. I'm just gonna, if you indulge me just for a second. Let's see if I can. Sometimes the camera does this and sometimes it doesn't. And maybe it's not that important, but
While you're looking for that, what's the symbol between the Om symbol and the Sikh one? The one that kind of looks like a star or an explosion?
I don't know. Maybe somebody else knows. I know Om.
Is
But
it Baha?
Oh, is that Baha? Is that Baha'i?
Baha, like
Is it Baha'i?
Baha. Go, Amber, go. I don't know. Does anybody else know? So isn't this an interesting flower? It's just got all these different colors. Can you see it? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I took that, not yesterday, but the day before on my bike ride. I found that, and there's even a little bug in there living. I just thought that was odd. And there were several of them. I hadn't seen that flower before. Anyway.
Almost looks like bleach was dropped on the top of it.
Yeah.
Like the way it would make specks on your clothes.
Yeah. So you're talking about the star here, or are you talking about?
Yeah, that one that you just put the cursor on. Yeah. I guess that could be Baha'i. I don't remember that being the Baha'i symbol, but I could be wrong.
Well,
Just curious.
they'd like. Oops. So that was just an interesting, I just think about how important each of the petals is. And there may be other petals that you would put in there, and maybe different petals that you would take out. I don't know, but it's a stock photo. So, the differences for John Cobb in process relational theology is something that actually enhances us, not divides us, and suggests how can we think about and understand the differences between us, one religion and another religion, as something that enhances us rather than dividing us. Cobb extends pluralism to the very structure of the universe in his book, God and Creativity. And Christ reveals, for him, Christ is about the power of creative transformation. And he thinks that can be the case for persons of various religions. They wouldn't call it Christ, but they would call it maybe a principle of the movement of the religion is about creative transformation. Suchocki argues that a transformational pluralism in which the differences are not debilitating, nor are they glassed over. They're not just like, well, we can all agree on this one thing and then everything else is unimportant. No, it's a transformational pluralism that may focus on some commonalities, but rather sees the way that different religions and different claims can supplement and enhance each other. I can learn something about my own religiosity and my own spirituality and my own understanding of divinity from engaging with persons of a Sikh religion or of Buddhism. And I think some folks who have studied different religions have reflected upon this and have experienced it quite clearly. Like, it's not that I'm going to convert and be a Buddhist. I'm not going to convert and become a Hindu, but the spiritual claims and the insights of yoga, I think, are very enhancing to my own spirituality, which is grounded in Christianity. Which I'm a Christian, but I find some of the insights in the yogic traditions very helpful, and not just helpful. In some ways, they can be transformative as to how I understand what's going on in my own religions. If somebody has something they need to say, I can't really read what you're writing in the chat. And I'm sure there's a way in which I could do that, but I can't figure it out right now.
I was just confirming on the Baha'i 9-pointed star symbol. That's all.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for doing that. I appreciate that, Amber. So for Suchocki then, transformational pluralism is where the differences can supplement and enhance each other of the different religions. So God then is like a flower with many petals, each contributing something unique, adding to the beauty and complexity and the ability of creative transformation for the whole. I like that symbol or that image. Now, for Suchocki to move into the Christian doctrines, she talks about how creation is, she understands creation as in the beginning was the relation. In the beginning was the relation. This is actually very similar to the gentleman who wrote I, Thou. In the beginning was the relation between I and thou. So thou is, the word thou is used to symbolize God, a divine thou. There's dialogue with other followers, or followers, I should say, of other religions. And that opens us not only to a greater understanding of these persons who are following other religions, but it also opens us to a greater understanding of God, of what is divinity about, or who divinity is, and a greater understanding of ourselves. And this, I think, it's a challenge. And it's a challenge to be able to, three things, I think. First, it's a challenge to take seriously the claims of other religions, because perhaps it might be telling us, or we might realize that our religious claims are not the only religious claims. It's not the only way of addressing that issue from a religious perspective or a divine perspective, but they might make different claims than what we're making. So it might challenge the security with which we have, or the certainty with which we have about those claims. And then it can also open us to be beyond. It might enhance the claim that we're making, to see it in a different light, not just, oh, God is love, we've understood it in this way, but it could expand to this as well. God is love. And I think some of you have had that experience of a claim that isn't making a claim that's contradictory to a claim that you might have had before. And by claim, I mean something beyond just a truth affirmation. Like, yeah, it's cloudy today, or yes, the clouds are pretty today, and there's not a lot of them, or something like that. But rather a claim that's a core claim, God is love, or that God is enabling creative transformation. But rather it's something that opens us up to a different way of understanding that, where it's almost like, oh, yeah, God is love, and it means something different now. And I don't know if other people have had that experience or not, but you might just reflect upon that. Maybe you can't name the experience that you've had, but I invite you to keep it in your mind, and for the next time that you're in a worshiping context, to reflect upon that. And then I think the third thing is that it helps us understand ourselves differently. What does it mean to be human? Not just me, Helene, or Dr. Russell, or Tangelo's mom, but rather who I am and how I understand myself is expanded. And my abilities to understand and love are greater, more flexible, more malleable, more able to be developed in different directions. Okay, I think she's ready to go in. I'm just going to take her in for a second. I'll be right back. Excuse me and thank you. So creation is understood in Marjorie's kind of constructive approach here with religious pluralism as the glasses, the glasses through which we are engaging in the core claims of Christianity. She's saying that relationships are essential and primary to God. We are related to each other and related to God, and God is very much a part of those relationships and encouraging those relationships and encouraging the ways, the quality of those relationships. Human relationships to other people and other creatures define who we are. They define our identity. I think it's interesting that back in the day, and I don't know if it's still the case, I don't remember from our beginning time together, but usually when my experience has been that when you ask people to identify themselves and say a little something about themselves, often men will say a little bit about themselves and maybe what they do. In this context, it might be that, they're a student, so they're not going to say much about what they do because they're a student. They might say their denomination. Whereas women, in my experience, tend to usually say something about relationships. They either say, I have 4 kids, I'm married. They might even say, and I'm friends with, Zach may introduce himself and say, yeah, I know who Terea is, and I've just met Jackie, and I'm taken a couple classes with Mary Beth. I mean, so they might say something like that. It was just interesting to reflect upon that, like the fact that our relationships really do define our identities. For a variety of people, that's a common assumption, or that's easy to understand or easy to affirm. We are who we are in relationship to others. Whether we name that and acknowledge that, or it's something that we have to reflect upon a little more deeply to be aware of. Marjorie or Suchocki also talks about Genesis as the creation out of chaos. Some of you might have read Genesis and have heard about the discussion about in the beginning, the world was without form and void, that word void, to home, be interpreted as chaos. And you think about chaos. I mean, I can imagine the beginning of creation, the beginning of time, the beginning of the earth, even sort of a chaos of energies and a chaos of atoms and nuclei, and some elements form, some not, air currents or jet streams or things flowing in all kinds of different ways. And that's really fundamental way of thinking about creation from process theology, is that what God does is suggest order, bring entities into deeper relationship with each other to create an order, to bring the hydrogen molecules together to make helium, and then to make lithium, and then to go on to make carbon, the core fundamental element necessary for life on this earth. So creation, whether, even if you're not thinking of it as God being engaged in it, really the beginning of life has to do with creating order out of chaos. So this order then, process theology sees God as directing and luring this order, making these possibilities of relationships and ways of ordering things actual. And what's it look like? Make it actual. Oh, look, those molecules just made a carbon. let's do that. Okay. I mean, obviously it's not, that's more of a cartoon version, but it is something that I think, you know, over millions of years is occurring or did occur. And it happens in a relational context, right? You have to have molecules getting together and relating to each other in a new way, right? I mean, those of you who know chemistry know that you have the chemical compounds are, the chemical elements, I should say, not compounds, are created, the elements are created in different variations or no, that's what that is, in different configurations of some elements are have an closed number of electrons and some have an extra one, right? Or an extra two, and that extra electron, you know, wants to bind or make a bond with a covalent bond with another element that has, oh, I need one to make a nice coherent and stable element, right? I'm going to have more stability if I join with this element over here that has one single electron. And when we come together, and then that creates a covalent bond, and that's a strong bond. Anyway, I'm talking about chemistry now, and I really don't know that much about chemistry, so I'm going to go on. But the idea is that I'm trying to communicate is that what Whitehead and process theology is talking about is not just Adrian and Mary Beth making a bond about they have something in common that they've shared or experienced, or you know, Adrian and I having this yoga connection, right? Or making making the class together when we're teaching yoga. But it's even at the core of chemistry. It's not just at the core of what people of life and people. It's at the core of the very chemistry that makes up the universe. Okay, enough with the preaching. So God is the creator, and God is in this relational context of luring and drawing us to make those kinds of connections, because it might be a little scary. I've only got one little electron, and you've got 5. Maybe you're going to take my electron, and then I won't have mine. Or how do we work it out that we can have that bond, and is it a strong bond? And God is a part of that relational context and enjoys it when we get together like that, so to speak. And here, diversity, then, the differences can be brought together with well-being. So diversity and well-being come together. So we can have stronger well-being if we have a stronger diversity within our community. We see this in biodiversity, right? If you just have one kind of bird, it's not as strong as if you have 15 different kinds of birds. I don't need to go into that. Everybody understands that, right? Like, yeah, okay. Now, the particularity of each entity is known by God and is valued. God values the particularity of each entity. And each entity is lured by God toward novelty, or with novelty toward well-being. There's a new way of thinking about this, a new way of bonding together, a new thought, a new idea, a new way of walking. Let's try this new walking, right? And that might make it easier to have well-being. That's a lot, but any questions about creation? Okay. So now Suchocki also talks about creation as call and response. And this, I think, is really brilliant and creative. I love the way that she brings in the liturgical context into understanding our notion of creation. And now God calls just as the preacher calls, and God calls to a community, in a particular community that knows, has a sense of what to say. right? If someone who's used to a call and response that's spontaneous would come in and preach at my church, people would be like, okay, what do we do? I don't know. Let's just say, thanks be to God. Thanks be to God. Okay, right? Because we've got things, our call and response is kind of scripted, but there's another argument for that, because I actually find that very stabilizing rather than it being spontaneous. But so the call and response is distinct and personal to particular communities, and it is relational, right? So there's a relationship developed between the speaker, the preacher, and the congregation. And sometimes that relationship is dependent upon a context of everybody kind of knows what the parlay is. Everyone knows what the foundation of the speech or the engagement is. And it happens, I think, almost unconsciously. It's not just, okay, the preacher has said that. What am I supposed to say now? I forget. Oh, that's right. I'm going to look it up. And it's not like that at all. It happens almost unconsciously or without my intention. Like, I don't know I'm saying it until I'm in the middle of saying it, right? It's not like I hear the words and then I think and reflect, what am I supposed to say? It's like it just comes. I don't know. That's just my experience. And people may have other experiences that they'd like to share about this notion of call and response. Anybody like to do that? That would be, I'm happy to hear that.
So do we say that this call and response thing is scripted, or is it more well, like jazz, I guess, where one instrument plays a piece and then another one responds off of it and plays something different, but it's not quite planned, but it's all reactionary, instead of scripted? Or do you think it's scripted in a sense?
I think that it's not scripted. Scripted was the example that I have of that experience, of that relationality.
Okay.
I think that, sometimes people are more comfortable with that scripted. I know what to say. I know in my body knows what to say. That's what it is for me. It's like my body reacts before I'm actually responding. The Lord be with you, and also with you. It's coming out of my body, not really my cognitive reflection. And I think that the example or the metaphor of jazz is more suited. And I think that there are other traditions that have more of that kind of spontaneous or what's the word of jazz? Improvisational call and response. Right? It's happening maybe in the sermon. It's happening in prayers. It's happening without people knowing exactly. It's not in the bulletin. People should respond now, right? It just you're doing it. I think that's what that Marjorie's getting at in this, like that God's call to us occurs, and then we respond, and what God calls next depends somewhat on our response, and it's so just as my point was to talk about how this occurs in distinctive ways in distinctive communities, because it's not just God's calling all creation all at once and everybody responds in the same way, but rather God's call is unique and specific to a community or a person. So, and it doesn't just happen at church, like it happens in every moment, is the idea. She's just using the notion of call and response as a metaphor or an example of how God is engaging in that particular context. But in other contexts, God is also calling and we are also responding. And God's call to me may be distinct and different from God's call to you, because I'm in a different context than you are. It's just as simple as the phone is, if you're asking the phone to give you directions, the phone has to take a moment to figure out where you are, right? It can't just say turn left, because turning left may be the wrong direction. Like, you know, if Zach and I may be in the same place, but we're facing different directions, the phone is going to tell him to turn left and the phone's going to tell me to turn right, or the GPS, or does that make sense? Or have I
Yeah.
confused everybody? Okay, all right, good. So, and again, your response is distinctive, and it does depend upon your context, just as I suggested, and it depends on what's happened in the past and what's happening in the moment. I think so. Instead of moving forward into incarnation, what I like to do is take a break, and then we can come back because there's still some more stuff there in the PowerPoint, and I don't want us to be overstimulated. I know Marjorie was fabulous. So we had some time, extra time to talk to her. So why don't we go ahead and take a break? Let's take like a 15-minute break. Is that okay for folks? Okay. I'll see you back here at 2:50. How you doing, Birdie? Did you get some food? That's good. You were having fun out there, weren't you?
So Jackie, after meeting Dr. Suchocki, are we going to have to like totally rethink our PowerPoint?
I don't think so. I don't think she said anything dramatic on that point. I just really appreciate the humanness factor. I was really feeling like everything's in my head these days. Like I'm just too dumb.
I watched a little bit of that video this past week, but I had seen it before, but I had been, as I was trying to keep up with the stream of thought, I kept trying to do what you were talking about, putting her voice to the words to kind of try to understand it a little bit more. Yeah.
Based on our conversation, you're not in the too dumb camp, you're in the smart camp. That's just speaking to me.
No, I mean, again, I'm still working back through it to make sure I got everything, so, and understanding it correctly. So, yeah. So Dr. Russell, this would be your primary book.
Say again?
This would be your primary book on process, or an introduction to process theology.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of introductions. I mean, I like her video introduction. I mean, her focus is more on the relational thinking. The other thing is the Creating Women's Theology. There's a really nice, and that's a book that myself and Monica Coleman and Nancy Howell did together. And we each have an introduction. I mean, I think you read part of it. That can be helpful to get us, depending on what you want to do with it. The Cobb and Griffin book was written a while ago, and it's sort of an introduction to process theology. There's also one by M-E-S-L-E. I think his name is Robert.
Yeah, I've got that one. Yeah.
I like Suchocki's. I like this one because she really is one sort of setting forth the process stuff. I mean, I also use the fall to violence in the systematic theology. By the way, some of you should be taking the systematic theology class in the fall if you're MDiv students. So and we use Marjorie's Fall to Violence, in which she has a nice introduction to some of the process language and worldview. And then God, Christ, and the World is another one. You know, Marjorie's, I mean, she's in her late 80s now. And I think everybody, when they at least get to be in their 80s, your brain just slows down a bit, right? Well, maybe it doesn't, but I think most people I know, it does. And she's also, since she retired, really focused a lot on more practical, like how to talk about process theology in ways that are more for church folks. And so the later stuff, I think, it seems to me more accessible. But I think with this introduction, and if you reread some of the work, if you're really trying to understand a process worldview, and then take a look at maybe what she's saying in The Fall to Violence. It's a really, I really like the book, not because I necessarily agree with her conclusion, but I think it's a beautiful example of constructive theology, of her taking how has sin been understood. Here's what Augustine says, here's what Kant says, here's what maybe she uses Kierkegaard. Here's what Niebuhr says, here's what's wrong or what has not been effective or helpful from those theologians throughout the last 2,000 years. Here's the problem we have now. She takes a look at, she was a juror, right, on a murder trial. And so she takes a look at different newspaper articles that talk about violence happening in the world. And she talks about how can we understand this violence in the world where God is present? in every moment. And then what are we called to do? And then she talks a little bit about how we understand the notion of sin. We think about it as something that's internal to us, not like original sin in the sense that something you're born with, but rather something like collective sin in which you're born into, right? So we have these assumptions that we've, I mean, you can take racism as a perfect example of it, right? We're born into a racist assumptions, even as we fight against those assumptions. For some of us, we don't get to the place where we're starting to question them until later in life. And when we start to realize, oh, I've thought and said things that I had no idea were racist, but in fact they are, or they have a foundation of racist assumptions. And only then can we start to rethink how we want to express ourselves and what beliefs we're claiming, and then how we should behave, right? So that book engages the questions of evil and sin in that way, which I think it's not necessarily because I've agreed with everything she says, but I think it's a great example of the work of a theologian. I don't know if that answered the question.
Cool.
Probably much more than you wanted.
Yeah, it does. I had mentioned I had been in a Facebook conversation with Dr. Ord last week, and I mentioned that I was in your class, and he's like, "Oh, what does Helene use for process?" So, I told him about the creating women's theology and working with this book. And I had mentioned a couple others that I had read, some Epperle's and things like that. So, yeah.
Epperle has some good stuff as well. Tom Ord's got some good stuff. I've used in the past, I've used two of his works. Usually I include his discussion about God as love along with Kierkegaard. And I think I used Wesley mostly because there was a lot of Methodists instead. But he's got a really nice chapter on love. He's got lots of chapters on love, but I think I don't know that he would claim a affinity with Wesley, but I certainly see an affinity.
Oh, he does. Yeah, he did one of those 5 reasons to go Wesley with Trip Fuller. So he's very much on the Wesley track. Yeah.
John Wesley is a brilliant theologian, brilliant practical theologian. I mean, some of his stuff is dated because it is the 1600s,
Right.
We should say 1700s, and it's old. But unfortunately, in my interpretation and viewpoint, many of the Methodists in the United States have they've taken some of the things that he said as if that were really meant in a 1700s context, and made those in stone and disregarded the stuff that were actually what was more important to him,
Right.
theology, and said, oh, well, that's secondary. So it's more important that we don't let gay people into our church, and it's more important that we don't have pastors playing cards and drinking wine, or and we don't forgive people who have had sex outside of marriage, even if they're not having an affair, they just haven't gotten married yet. But all of that somehow seems to disregard the emphasis that John Wesley himself had upon forgiveness and love. God is love, period. God is love. And we are all in the process of working toward perfection. We're not there yet, right? We have forgiveness, and it's the whole communal work that he talks about in terms of what's going on in churches, or what goes on in those Wednesday night clubs, or what does he call them again?
Oh gosh, now I don't. Now the word's not there anymore. Band meetings, class meetings.
Yeah, I mean, they talk about the ways in which I have sinned, not because I'm evil, but I've not done as well as I'd like to have done. And it would be almost, I'm sure someone else has written this article because I kept threatening to write it for forever. But it seems a little bit like a 12-step program about sin,
Hmm.
right? I
Yeah.
have failed, and God is my creator, and this community is holding me responsible, or keeping me in, in a disciplined, responsible way toward working towards getting rid of this addiction I have towards sin, or whatever is the addiction is, or whatever it is. But anyway, that's a lot about myself. That's not what we're talking about. But, so
That was encouraging either way. So yeah.
Welcome back, everybody, and thank you for your kind attention. And I'm glad that everybody got to see Marjorie. I doubt she's going to come tomorrow, so you guys are the special ones. So you got to see her. I just thought, how wonderful we're on Zoom. It's not something that would happen if we weren't on Zoom, right? Because she's not going to travel all the way here from Dallas, where she's living now. But anyway, so Marjorie goes on then in the chapter on incarnation. So we talked about creation and how she understands creation and this call and response. And then she's going to talk about incarnation. So how she understands incarnation from a process perspective, and how we can rethink our conceptualization and how we name it in such a way that it is not a barrier to interreligious conversation and working together with persons of other religions that maybe don't affirm Jesus as an incarnation or the only incarnation of God. So in this, she says, God is in the world. And that's kind of the whole point. God is in the world. God is radically present in every moment, in every unique becoming. So therefore, therefore, her understanding of process theology is that God is radically incarnate. And that doesn't mean God wasn't incarnate before Jesus was born. It doesn't mean that God is only radically incarnate in Jewish and Christian religions or in Jewish and Christian people. God is radically incarnate in every moment, nor is God only radically incarnate in people. God is radically incarnate in the bird that's wanting to come outside. And so I am paying attention to the radical incarnate call of the divine to say, let me in or let me out. So God is radically present at every moment in every unique becoming. So therefore, we're claiming parallel truths. And the parallels are according to the context and the situation. And that's not an incoherent claim, because the truths are different vis-a-vis the relationships to the needs and the perspectives of those in the context and situation. Now that's kind of complex. Are there questions about that? Should I explain it more, or should I say more? It's a little bit like when I was drawing the circles with T's, big T's and little T's, when we were talking with Dr. Frankie. So that the parallel truths are in those, they're in the relationships, they're in the encounter. God is truly encountering and incarnate in the entity, in each entity, but it's directed and pointed. The actual, here we're going to direct you this way, and to what I'm pointing you to is different according to where each entity is and the capacity, right? So God is not going to direct Tangelo to go to the Sikh community. Well, that might be not a bad idea. They'd probably like to see a little bird. Anyway, right? So whereas God can direct me to send something, a letter or some kind of symbol of solidarity, My neighbor actually is Sikh, and so I was chatting with him and his in-laws about this. So I mean, God attends to the ability and context and situation of each entity in a unique way that takes those abilities, those capacities, those some of which are known and some of which are a little unexplored, into account as God lures and directs. Any questions about that? Okay. God's immanence is known and experienced more deeply than rational thinking and objective claims can articulate. And that kind of gets to what I was talking about in terms of the call and response. Sometimes there's a response that's deeper or more primal than me thinking and reflecting upon it. God's immanence is radically incarnate within each of us. And that's true for all occasions. And all occasions is not like, oh, you're having an occasion like someone's getting, baptized or married, but for all occasions, meaning that's the process term for each entity or each person or each reality. And this looks and feels different according to our culture, our experience, and our religious symbol system. So we're going to interpret those ways in which God's immanence becomes incarnate to us differently because we have different symbol systems, we have different stories, we have different ways of understanding how God engages with us. For some folks, God engages with us in the words of a bird, or the sounds of a bird, or following the wings. For others, God engages with us primarily through scripture, through the New Testament, or through maybe God also engages, or from a different context, God engages with us in the discussion with other persons who care very much about the theological questions being asked, as in the Mishnah, as in the rabbis arguing or discussing. For yogis, God's immanence is in the process, in the practice. It's in the movement, it's in the breath. It's in the mantra. Maybe it's not in the meaning of the mantra as you say it once, but in how it is ingrained into one's psyche as gets repeated over and over again, not just nonstop, but rather every day, every morning. And this reminds me of the notion of light and the confusion we have about whether or not light is a particle or a wave. And so I shared this video, and I think it's related to how our religious language, our rituals, our symbols are abstractions from our actual experience. And thus we can never reduce God to those. We can't reduce God and say God is only in this word, or only in these words, or only in this ritual, or only in this action, or only in these symbols. God is always beyond them. I look at the Lord as my light and my salvation. And did anybody watch this? Now, can you see it? Or are you still looking at can you see what I'm looking at? Is God a light or a particle?
I still see the PowerPoint.
Yeah, I still see the PowerPoint, not the video.
That's what happened in the faculty meeting today. I think it's this, right? What's this? I don't want that. Right?
Now we can see the video.
Yeah.
So last week I talked about wave particle duality, this very odd concept in the subatomic world, and how it manifested in the light. How light sometimes acts like a particle and sometimes acts like a wave. Now, if the weirdness stopped there, we might be able to sleep at night, but we can't sleep at night because it gets even weirder. Because you're like, okay, it was just light, just whatever. Light's going to be weird and we can deal with that. No, it turns out everything's weird. Matter. That's right, matter. This stuff, you and me have both particle and wave properties depending on the situation, which is very, very weird indeed. And the first realization of this came from a French physicist named Louis de Broglie. Everyone, I can't pronounce that name. De Broglie? I think it's de Broglie. De Broglie. That's what we said in physics class. Louis de Broglie made a connection because prior to him, we had Max Planck's work, which dealt with light and related the energy contained in light to the frequency of the light or the wavelength of light through a constant called Planck's constant. He didn't name it himself. That came later. He wasn't that narcissistic, but it happened. So it told you like how chunky light was at a fundamental level. So Louis de Broglie comes over and says, hey, wait a minute, light has energy, light has momentum, it has a wavelength, right? But a moving particle, like say an electron has momentum, electron has energy, maybe an electron has a wavelength. So we put that out there. It's just a pure hypothesis, like, hey, maybe an electron has a wavelength. But then you immediately start asking some really, really good questions like, what does it mean for an electron to have a wavelength? Like an electron's like a tiny little bullet, dude. It's just a little, like, look, I can hold an electron in my hand. What do you mean it's a wave or it has wave-like properties? And so everyone thought it was nuts. No one thought it was nuts. But we started doing experiments with electrons. And we started replicating some experiments we had already done with light. So we had done experiments with light where there were two narrow slits and we shone light through the narrow slits and then let the light project on the screen behind it. And this was done in the early 1800s by Thomas Young, and it's called the Young's double slit experiment. And it shows how the wave nature of light comes out in these experiments because the light would interfere with itself in very, very interesting ways, and you'd end up with a pattern. You'd end up like with stripes on the opposite end, exactly as if you had sent water waves through these two narrow little slits, and the water waves added up and destroyed each other in very creative ways, and you end up these stripes at the other end. So we started shooting electrons through double slits because, hey, why not? It's early 1900s, got nothing better to do. And lo and behold, we get stripes at the other end. What? Like, think about it. You're shooting electrons, tiny little bullets, through some narrow slits, like pew, 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 pew. And somehow, like there'll be a lot of electrons here, not a lot next to them, and then a lot will land over here, and then not a lot, and then a lot, and a lot. Why is an electron acting like a wave? What is the wave? Where is it? I mean, I can see a water wave. I can conceptualize an electromagnetic wave, but what's waving with an electron? What's doing the wiggling? So then we invented quantum mechanics, another episode. And we came up with the math to describe all this. The behavior of electrons, going through, putting into words is hard. These are the various interpretations of quantum mechanics. Like, how do we actually describe this stuff? And I'm going to give you like the default explanation, the Copenhagen interpretation. This is the most commonly accepted interpretation of quantum mechanics. Take it for what you will. To me, they're just, words. To me, the math matters the most, but no one listens. In the Copenhagen interpretation, the wave that we associate with an electron is a wave of where the electron might be the next time we go looking for it. So an electron really isn't a little tiny bullet when it's traveling alone all by its lonesome. It's only a bullet when you actually see it. When you go looking for an electron, you start bouncing light off it, interacting with it, like, ooh, now there's an electron. There it is. But when you're not looking, when there's no interactions, nothing, then the wavy nature comes out. And the electron might be here, but it might be over here, might be over here, might be over here. there's a wave equation, a mathematical equation that describes a wave of where the electron might be the next time you go looking for it. So when you're shooting these electrons through the slits, as they travel, as they propagate, they're not little bullets, they're little like clouds of where they might be. And these clouds, since they're described by waves, the Schrodinger wave equation to be specific, they interact with each other just like ocean waves do, just like electromagnetic waves do. And then when these clouds, so you can imagine like, okay, there might be an electron here, there might be some electron here. They go through the slits and they start interacting with each other in a very complicated way, exactly like waves would. And it kind of spreads out where you might find the electron. Then when that wave finally hits the screen, that is a measurement, that is an interaction. The wave function goes away and it's replaced with a particular location of where that electron could be found. And it will be most likely to be found along the center strip, not likely to be found next to it, then likely to be found next to it. You'll get these stripes. So slowly over time, one electron at a time, you build up the pattern of these stripes.
So I just thought that's so fascinating. I'm not a science person, and maybe some of you have background in science, but it sounds a lot like he's talking about God. Like he could be talking about God. Like sometimes God seems to be this, sometimes God seems to be that. I mean, Wesley, actually, that's a quote from John Wesley. Sometimes God, when he's talking, people ask him about redemption. How does redemption work? Sometimes God does it this way, sometimes God does it that way. Who are we to tell God how to do it? Right? I mean, it seems like, to me, it's indicates that even electrons, the core things that science has come up with to know more about what constitutes reality is not, it's not that it's not known completely, it's that it can't say it's definitely this and not that. I mean, it's more diffuse, it's broader, it's more than one thing. It's known in more than one way, which I think is a wonderful way to think about God. God is not just one entity, one conception, or one symbol, or one even one theology. And God's known in more than one way. Sometimes God's known in our actions. Sometimes God's known in our inaction. Sometimes God's known in our prayer. Sometimes God's known in our yoga practice. Sometimes God's known in our hymns or our study. Bless you. Sounds like it, or it looks like somebody might be praying. I mean, sneezing, praying. Yeah. So I just find that fascinating to me. But at any rate, any comments about that? Does it seem kind of way off, or does it help make sense, or is it just sort of like a diversion for the science-minded folks?
I think if we're going to understand, like Paul talks about, being able to know about God in the created world by looking at the created world, I think that's one way of doing that. I mean, paying attention to the intricacies and the diversity of creation in itself, therefore should be able to teach us something about the personality or the nature of God. We can't completely grasp it as we look at it through a mirror dimly, and I think that's where I really think that's where we where we get lost, because and Dr. Suchocki said it, we think that what we see through that dirty mirror is what it is, and we forget that the mirror is cluttered with a bunch of our stuff that we put on there, and we're we think that that is the only way to look at it. It's like the people who lived in the Emerald City in Wizard of Oz in the book, not the movie. They all had these green glasses on, so they said that, well, the Emerald City is emerald, but it's just because they had to wear those glasses all the time. So.
Great. I can bring in physics. You can bring in the Wizard of Oz. So the point here is we don't know if God's a Trinity or if God's a singularity or a multitude or beyond numbers, or maybe all of those, just as light is a particle and a wave and can't be nailed down to one or the other. Suchocki talks about God's creative lure toward the future. And here, this is the one thing I wanted her to explain more, but maybe I'll ask her to send me a message about it. But so, because God is present at all times in us, like God has an idea what the future is going to be in the moment, not an absolute control over it, but an idea of what might be the best way it would work. And so God lures us toward the future. God incarnates with us in every moment of becoming, helping the past, our past, your past, our past in general, be synthesized in a harmonious way in the moment of the present. And God is the lure that projects and draws us toward a creative, constructive option for the future. This is called the superject. For those of you really interested in process theology, you might think about this as a superject. For those of you who it confuses you, just, or what's a superject? It's a word that Whitehead invented to talk about this, right? It's kind of a superject is like, I'll just say this. When you're riding your bike or when you're doing yoga, there's a kind of impetus toward the next thing. So as you're moving that way. So there's kind of a push in that direction as opposed to pushing this direction, right? So the superject is kind of that push into the future. So even in the present, there's a kind of, in this moment, as you're becoming, there's also a notion of what's next in the next moment, not like what's next in 300 years or something. So God is radically incarnate in each of us. So the question is it possible for you to cherish and follow the truth of your own religion while at the same time honoring the truths of others? And this may be a two-dimensional question. Is it possible for you to conceptualize that someone could do that because of the way that Marjorie's talking about God, the way that we're talking about God right now, which may not be your understanding of God, but this radical incarnation of God in every moment, in every entity, thus would demand that God incarnates or lures in different directions, perhaps with different goals for different folks in different contexts. And is it possible for you to follow your own religion in all truth and integrity, while at the same time honoring that someone else may have a very different truth than you? So I'm going to return to that when we're done, but so it's more of a rhetorical question, but it might be a discussion question. So in the next chapter, and I think this is a really interesting chapter, the Image of God chapter. And that's chapter 4. We've often talked about, Christianity's often talked about the image of God as something that's kind of something that we all have in common. So it's reducing the image of God, or God is a reduction of what we all have in common, like rationality. Like, when I was growing up, for some reason, I really loved science. So I would watch all the PBS things about science and everything. And for a while there, the argument was that the unique thing about humans is that they can use tools, and that no other animal uses tools. And for some reason, what was unique about human got confused in my mind as the image of God. So that meant the image of God was that we could use tools. You can see the logic, particularly if you're a minister's kid and you're reading too much Kierkegaard when you're 10 and trying to teach it to your teddy bears. So, so you can see though also that as those of you who are younger than me will probably very much clearly say, oh, but that's not true. Birds use tools, monkeys use tools. Yeah, I know you use tools. Yes, Tangela says, I use tools. I mean, you've read about the birds that they did studies on them, and they, here's a little stick. Here's some peanut butter or some sticky stuff. Maybe it's honey. And then there's a bunch of things that they want to get that are in here, but you can't get to them unless you pick up the stick, put it in the sticky stuff, put the stick down and bring it out, and then you can get the stuff. Now, that's something a 5-year-old child could probably figure out. But a bird? Yep. So, I mean, there's been really interesting studies about some birds, including parrots, of course, but also crows. Crows are really smart. They can do all kinds of really interesting things. And they remember the face of somebody that's been mean to them, or mean to their parents, or mean to their grandparents. Somehow they're taught. I don't know, I can't tell one crow from another. But they can tell one person from another. So at any rate, so the question then is, it's not tools, then that's the image of God. So for Suchocki, well, not for Suchocki, but in the book, then she talks about the ways in which this has been understood in our tradition. So we've got Augustine and Aquinas and even Wesley who talk about this in detail. So one example of what is this image of God is it's Trinitarian, right? It's that we have memory, we have intellect, we have will, a kind of Irenaeus argument. Irenaeus is also an early church father who's from Northern Africa. Or is it contemplative knowing, practical knowing, and will, which is more of Augustine, and some degree Thomas. So the notion that there is a Trinitarian structure within the human mind, which I think I've talked about this before in this class, but this contemplative knowing, practical knowing, and will, it reminds me of Star Trek, where you've got a contemplative knowing that's kind of pure reason, logic, Captain, and then you've got a practical knowing that is, I'm a doctor, Jim, not a physicist, not a logician. Like, what's the practical knowledge here? What do you do here? And then there's will, where the captain puts them together and gives orders. Anyway, or as Suchocki says in her conclusion in this chapter is, could we understand the image of God as summative, something that's manifest in a human community as we come together, each with a piece of the puzzle, each religion with a piece of the puzzle, kind of like that flower, right? Each with a petal that is necessary for the beauty of the flower and for the completeness of the flower. So we'll return to that question in the next few slides. But I think the details here are helpful, both in terms of understanding the history of Christian theology, but also in understanding and thinking about your own constructive view. So as I said, Irenaeus, Augustine, Aquinas, they differentiate the terms they talk about these questions, and they differentiate the terms image of God and likeness of God, both of which they take out of the Hebrew scripture. And this is an issue that is particularly important for Christians and not particularly important for rabbis and other Jewish writers, even though there's also lots of midrash on other issues throughout the Bible. But this one is kind of focused more. The Christians are the ones that are really talking about this. So they're taking different terms or different words from the Hebrew scriptures, and one is to indicate image, the other is to indicate likeness, to denote the differences that Adam's sin made in human being vis-a-vis God after he sinned. So the image is damaged in the fall, but the likeness is lost in the fall. So I used to, when I taught this class, when there was a chalkboard, I would draw a picture of Adam, and Adam, when Adam is created, has a parrot called the, that's basically the likeness of God that is so clear of what God wants and how to behave that just speaks into your ear, because parrots talk, right? That's why it's a parrot, not because Tangelo influenced me. But so in this, in the Roman Catholic view, which is developed from Augustine and Aquinas, this is pre-fall Adam. And when Adam falls, the parrot flies the coop. So Adam no longer has the capacity to behold and become like God in goodness and justice. The image of God, however, can be fully restored. It's slightly damaged, it's a little confused, but it's still there. But it can be fully restored through Christ. Now, the full perfection of the image and the likeness that was gone because of Adam's sin, is returned in the heavenly state of glory, basically returning Adam to his original state. Now, this is a tradition that's gone for a long time in Christian tradition, but it's not the only tradition. I mean, it's not the only line of thinking, but it was the dominant one, and has been the dominant one for, hundreds and hundreds of years. Martin Luther, he's got to come in and change things. He's got to change everything, with his beer. He talks about the imago Dei as being deeply corrupted and distorted by sin. So not only is the likeness of God, the parrot, flied the coop, like flown away, and we are no longer able to behold and become like God, but also even the Trinitarian structure of the human soul has been damaged. It's so corrupted that we're missing an eye, we're missing an arm, our way of understanding who God is so distorted and clouded over. We've got cataracts in our understanding or our when we behold God, that only it can only be fixed by Christ, in which humans can participate in Christ only by faith. But it can't be known visibly. One has to simply have the faith, or trust that Christ has it. We can talk more about Martin Luther's understanding. Some of you have taken some history, and I imagine that Scott C. may talk about this. But for Martin Luther, Christ's redemption is like a sheet that looks like Jesus, like it's a Halloween costume. And just go with me here. I know it's not as light as that, but it's a Halloween costume that looks like Jesus, right? And so the sinner, by faith, gets this Halloween costume that looks like Jesus. So when he or she approaches God in heaven, God lets them in to heaven because it's Jesus. Come on in. But this only later in Martin Luther's and Lutheran theology does this costume kind of have transformative impact. But we won't go into the details there. That's one way of thinking about it, where the image of God is so deeply corrupted that only with this costume can we enter heaven. For John Wesley, it's slightly different. So the Wesleyans in the room may like this. And that is that it is a heart, as he says, quotes, the quote from Wesley, a heart filled to overflowing with love toward God and one another. That's the Imago Dei. And Wesley has a wonderful sermon about how we don't know if the animals have an image of God, or no, let me rephrase that. We don't know if the animals have this intelligence or this rationality, or Wesley unknowingly might have said an ability to use tools. But what we do know is that God loves us and wants us to love each other and the animals. They may, in fact, be better at it than we are. Maybe he had a bird or a dog that loved him. I mean, it's an interesting understanding of thinking of the image of God, not as rationality and not as this Trinitarian structure about, well, there's knowing and contemplative ability here, that kind of practical knowing in terms of that, and then there's willpower, but rather love. And this is from Charles Wesley, my favorite hymn, the line in my favorite hymn, Love Divine, All Loves Excelling, which is, we are changed from glory into glory, as the fullness of God's love and presence within us that is coming into fruition, which is the process of sanctification. So it's not changed from corrupted, distorted wormness that Luther talks about, or that Lutherans talk about. I had a friend at Claremont in graduate school who was from Norway, and he said, "We are worms, we are worms." That's what he was taught. We are worms. That's what sin has caused us to be, worms. Wesley is more like, no, that there's this prevenient grace that is, we're changed from glory into glory. So the glory of salvation and sanctification is a growing into glory. We're not worms changed, or snakes turned into princes, or no, I guess it was a frog. We're not a worm or a frog turned into a prince with divine kiss, but rather we are already beloved and glory. We're just getting more aware of that glory and more intensely being filled with God's glory within us. There's something about glory too that I'll talk about at some other point, just remind me. Now, the image of God, Suchocki suggests, can help us with this affirmation of pluralism. She develops these views of the Imago Dei by insisting that this image is communal and not individual. Right? So it's not internal to me, it's not limited to me, but rather communal. That God's image is as a community. And it's communal in the sense that there's uniquenesses about it, like the flower with the petals of the different colors. It is established in and through irreducible diversity. The more diversity and complexity a community can have, the more like God it is. The more complexity and diversity, which, by the way, is also Whitehead's understanding of beauty. Beauty is conflict turned into contrast, all adding to the beauty of the whole and the creativity. This, Suchocki says, is known in the community of communities. God is internally related to God's self, as the Trinity names. We are internally related with ourselves and with each other across and throughout the globe. That's my neighbor, beeping. I really appreciate being able to be outside here, so I thank you for your patience and a little bit of distraction here and there, but I know it's going to rain tomorrow and be like 28 degrees. which reminds me I need to bring out all my plants, but it's so beautiful out right now. So I appreciate it. Any questions about that? So then she uses this image of a pericleresis. And does anybody know what pericleresis is? You ever heard that term before? So this is an internal, the internal diversity that is almost a little bit like the about light, right? That the electron is, it's sometimes here, sometimes there, and it's a kind of dancing. Like you have 3 electrons together, all dancing. You don't know where any of them are, but they're all interrelated to each other. And the way one dances affects the way the other dances. So we're called to embrace those, to kind of imitate this image of God. So the image of God is these, you know, they look a little bit like they're doing yoga, doesn't it? So you can tell why I like this one. You know, but it's a movement, right? It's not, I'm the Father, I'm the Son, and I'm the Holy Spirit, right? It's not like that. It's a more, I mean, in this notion, it's more fluid, a little bit more like something that can't be nailed down. God is always moving internally, and as God's moving internally, if you remember the video, the gentleman, which I thought he was kind of fun. So thank you for indulging me and listening to some of that. But I think it's a really interesting metaphor to think about God in this complex and knowable but not knowable, right? It's not completely unknowable, but it's not definable. You can't nail it down, right? Sometimes the electron's a wave. Sometimes it's a particle. Sometimes it looks like a little, what he called a bullet, or a little round thing going in a certain direction. Sometimes it looks more like it's a cloud, like could be there, could be there. There's a kind of dynamism and unpredictability. I mean, there's a little bit of prediction, right? There's a certain things it's not going to be. It's not going to become an ice cream cone, right? But there's that you can't nail it down and say it's this exactly and that nothing else. And I mean, he didn't talk about this, but the Heisenberg principle, anybody ever heard of Heisenberg? Yeah, people who have watched Big Bang, right? The Big Bang Theory, you saw that show where they talk about these kinds of things. I mean, Heisenberg says a couple things, but the thing I'm getting at right now is this notion of uncertainty, right? You can't know both the direction and the placement of an electron. You can either know where it is in a moment or where it's going. Right? Same thing I think about God. You can't know where God is in one moment or what direction God's going. And I don't mean that God is an electron. I mean, that's a symbol for thinking about the unknowability of the divine. It's much more complex and has a lot more quality to it than the electron, but it is a sense in which there's something in our understanding of physical science that helps us get a grasp in our understanding of the fluidity of the divine. And God is also affected, just as the electron is affected. Another Heisenberg thing is that the electron is affected by somebody looking at it. It's different when someone's looking at it than when someone isn't. I'm not sure how they figure that out, but because someone's got to see it, I guess. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a video. I don't know. But how interesting is that? Like an electron. I mean, we're not talking about a person that knows they're being watched, and so they, the child I know I'm being watched, so I'm not going to eat the cookie they told me not to eat. Right? It's not that. I mean, how does the electron know someone's looking at it in the? I don't know. It's a mystery. Anyway, so all of these are kind of me hitting at ways of maybe thinking and talking about this perichoresis of this internal dancing of the Trinity within and among each other, this symbol and metaphor for how religions can relate to each other. Right? How does Christianity relate then to Buddhism? And how does Islam relate to Shintoism? Or how might Sikh religion relate to Judaism? And I mean, and not just the people, but include the people. How can we relate to persons of different religions? To me, it seems very just fascinating, this incarnate unity of God's perichoretic love. I just like that. Any questions about that? I know this is a long PowerPoint, but we're almost there. This is another image of the Trinity. And I like this image because, you know, this is an old traditional depiction of the Trinity as these three parts sitting together, one of which is reaching for the grapes. But maybe it didn't intend this, but it seems to me there's a place for you at the table here. We're not only witnessing, just like the electrons behave in a different way, they almost in some way are inclusive of our presence in their movement, in their energy. We are also welcome to join the meal. And I think that's a pretty, that may be my Christian imagination, that maybe someone who's Buddhist wouldn't see it that way, but it is a Christian image. That it's almost a kind of being invited in, this image of the Trinity. But that may just be my way of thinking about it. I don't know. I always feel that's the way I feel about communion. When we can go back to church, I feel like we're being invited to the Lord's table. And when we eat the bread and drink the cup, we are participating with Christ. We're participating through this mystery of God's presence with us in a meal that we share together. And it's not a meal of, let's all go down to the point and have a beer. It might have a communal nature to it, but it's a sacred meal of being brought into the presence of the Trinity together. Anyway, enough of my theology. So now we're to the discussion questions. So I wonder what your response is to Suchocki's notion of this image of God as a communal term rather than an individual one. And I reflect upon, oh, my Mac is going to go to sleep in a second. I got to go inside. I wonder how this maybe has implications for the lure toward a way we think about religious pluralism. Another question is ask for a response to Suchocki's view of creation as contextual and developmental rather than absolute as universal. Creation is constantly in this call and response. Maybe it's more of a dance also, rather than God created the universe and then there it is. Now, some theologies will say there it is and then God leaves, or God's not really engaged in the immediate intimacies, or God creates this universe and then Adam and Eve screw things up with the serpent, who isn't the devil, by the way, he's just a serpent, and everything kind of goes downhill. So what was created then is moving away from what it was supposed to be, which is also kind of an absolute and universal, because it's saying this is what it's supposed to be, and then it falls. And each time as it falls, maybe it moves away from that absolute. But the hope in this view, the hope is that redemption brings you back to that original absolute goodness. And the third question is, how does this view of Imago Dei as communal help or hinder your treatment of a client or a concerned parishioner? So this would be for the folks who are doing a counseling program as particularly. And I don't know if any of you are, and I should know, but I don't remember if any of you are in the dual program or not. I think you're not. I think the other class is, but. So I wonder, so we got two options. I have no idea what time it is because I'm inside now and I don't have my phone. Oh, okay. So there's not a lot of time, but do you have questions? I mean, I'm gonna go out to the outside and you can all discuss how you want to proceed. If you want to talk about this individually, or if you want to get in your groups. I mean, if you want to talk about it now as we are all together. I don't hear anything.
I say we talk about it in our groups.
That's fine with me. My brain is dead.
Yeah.
It's powerful. It's powerful. I'm just tired.
That's a lot. Thinking.
I'm going to have to dance with the notion of the Imago Dei for a little while.
I don't know if James is still there or not. So be the groups, that might not be fair because in fact that would just be you and Mary Beth. So maybe it is better if we talk to the whole class.
Yeah, we've only got, 10 minutes or so. James, are you gone?
No, I'm still here.
Okay. So which question, go ahead and oh yeah, Terea, you're in the dual program. Okay, great. So I'm just gonna listen. So you guys chat.
So Zach, tell us why you're gonna have to dance with the image of what you just said. I'm tired too.
I mean, I'm just going to have to look back through it and kind of process it, for lack of a better term, how best to, I guess, what I'm being lured to in understanding it, yeah. How does this, does this work? Is it, yeah. I think I don't know. I've always kind of thought of as being, yeah, I'm gonna have to think about it. I have to put it into words. This is why I think a hybrid version of class will do really well in the fall, having both the in-person discussion and the getting onto the discussion board and further teasing it out after you've had time to think about it for a little while.
Yeah, so you all had a chance to, at least on the discussion board, interact with the questions about the notion of how we think about religious pluralism. I'm in the universe. Can you see there's the moon?
Okay, I'm thinking more, this isn't answering your question, but I think I'm thinking more about Suchocki's presence with us today and how the essence of her notion today was kindness, and that we should be kind to each other and that we should have community. And this point about diversity, that diversity makes things more beautiful. And she didn't come and rehash the book. Well, she blamed that because it's a long time ago that she wrote it. Our other guests have wanted to get into the weeds real fast on what they did or what not. And I feel like she is her question about what did we all do this weekend? I mean, why does she care? She's never going to see us again, right? But I think that she embodied that kindness and this diversity idea without having to lecture us on what she wrote. She was who she was. She cared about diversity. She cares about kindness. She cares about the beauty in each of us. And she just really embodied that with, I feel like, with the way she handled things.
I agree too, because the word that came to mind when you said she was embodying it, she was embodying that relationality that she writes about, that she shares, right? She is interested in what we were doing, what our thoughts were. And then I was really struck by her response to your question. I don't even remember what your question was, but she immediately started sharing ideas of how to navigate that relationality with the Sikh community. It wasn't like she was trying to hurry up and think of something. It just came out. So I agree completely that she was embodying, she embodied that theology that she was presenting in the book. Yeah.
She got her message across without preaching it. I mean, yeah.
Yes.
Well, going off what my lovely group members have said, I really like when she said, you know, she was like, I wrote this book a long time ago, but this is something that I've studied. And it showed, you know, it's something that she studies, it's something that she thinks about, it's something that she embodies, like Jackie and Adrian said. And I was like reading through some of the discussion posts as I was trying to type mine out, but I didn't get a chance to type it out before class. But one of you mentioned, you know, the school of thought of if you don't believe in Jesus, then you're going to hell. And how you didn't, you know, have the words or the language to articulate your thoughts, you know, before reading this book, or your stance on that notion. And I resonated with that because I don't know, my stepdad is Muslim, and my mom has said before, you know, that she prays for his salvation and, you know, like wants to see him in heaven or something. I'm like, okay, lady, you know, I'm like, I don't know, you know, it's like, who are we to say, you know, that somebody else is going to hell when they can be, you know, like a better whatever religion they are, you know, they can be a better Muslim than we are Christian. They can be a better, you know, whatever religion they are than we are. They can be more disciplined, more devoted, more, you know. And so I've always felt uncomfortable with that notion that, you know, everybody who isn't Christian is going to hell. I don't know. And I feel like people in church will look at you like you have three heads if you say that. You know, it's like, well, what do you believe? And I'm like, well, you know, those are my thoughts.
That was something that I kept hearing during the World Religions intensive back in March. Every person that we interviewed that came on into the class to share about their perspective, whether it was KP from the Sikh community, or a woman from the Hindu temple, or even the imam from the mosque. When they talked about conversion and things of this nature, and when people would come to those houses of worship and ask, how can I, you know, I'm feeling more like I should be a part of your tradition than my own, they would keep saying, they kept pointing that person back to their own tradition. They kept saying, be a better Christian. You know, if it was the Christian coming to wanting to be a Buddhist practitioner, or a Hindu, or even Sikh, they would say, you're already there. You just need to be more, you know, practice your faith a little bit more, you know, with a little bit more intentionality. Of course, that kind of gets complicated because I kept sitting there and thinking, you know, we're the only ones that would say, of course you can convert, you know, of course you should leave your your tradition behind. And so I think there's something for us to learn from that. Like we are, we're kind of the odd man out in how we approach that. When somebody says, "Oh, I think I should become a Christian," oh, great, we'll show you up. We don't have that appreciation of cross culturalization or cross faith in a lot of circles. No, not every Christian circle has that, but a good majority of us, because of the kind of the nature of the message that we latched onto. So.
Zach, I agree. I don't think people in other religions, and I'm sure some do, but as a general, like belief, I don't think they're worried about us and our salvation. So why are we so worried as Christians about, like other people's salvation? And I don't know. And I think it's contrary to the idea of community, right? Like, how are we even supposed to cultivate true Christian community, or even bridge the lines of community with other people from other cultures, ethnicities, religion, or what have you, if we have this barrier that Suchocki spoke of when she was on our call? I agree.
Well, I don't know what causes us, because I'm sure other religions. Let me say this: I've heard negative things about Christianity for how we, force ourselves onto others, and how we've done that in the past. I mean, historically, and not to say there's not another religion in history that's done that. Maybe not as much on a larger scale as we have, but those are things that I definitely have wrestled with before. Even growing up, I had a friend who was Jewish, a Deagle, and one of my best friends growing up, and I thought him and his parents were just some of the nicest and greatest people in the world. And I think I heard a sermon one day, and I was just like, I asked my mom and dad, I was like, so what happens when they die? Like, because then I'm like, he's probably a better person than I am. And if he's not going to heaven, like, what does that mean for me? And so starting to wrestle with some of that stuff early on is one thing, but I think, at least speaking towards Christianity, I think we deal too much in absolute, and then also in making things that should not be, maybe like the minor differences that we have into grander things, like just to argue about them. It's something Suchocki was saying earlier when she was talking about how we politicize almost everything, like the vaccination and things, like just the community, the things that are supposed to be like something that should be all around. Like, I want you to be healthy, I want you to be safe, I want you to be, have peace and joy in your life. And somehow we can find a reason to argue about everything. And so, as she was saying, it's just dumb. Like, so that's where I struggle with those kind of ideas, because I still feel, even if I believe a certain thing, I don't have to be in this irrational or argumentative relationship with you. I can still be in community with you, and I can still wish for the best for you and love on you and everything else, even if we don't see eye to eye. Like, you have your opinion, I have mine. But at the end of the day, I'm not gonna treat you anything like any differently than I would anybody else. So that's one of the things I and I'm speaking generally because I know there's pockets even within religions or denominations and Christianity where you just, again, I think me and Zach and Mary Beth have talked about it before. It's just like the person you're sitting next to in the pew doesn't even believe the same thing or is getting the same message that you're getting when you're sitting listening to a sermon. So you're walking out with two different perspectives. And you're still sitting next to that person though. So why can't we do that on a grander stage or multiple levels? Because at the end of the day, we're still people.
Yeah, especially for those of us who claim to be, I mean, we claim to be Christians and we claim that the point, that God is love, right? God is love. So it's so interesting that God is love sometimes translates into killing everybody that doesn't agree with us. Has translated into it across our history, which is really something to be ashamed of. We're at 4:00, and so I want to thank everybody for your quiet and well, not that you're quiet. I like you talking, but for you to listen to all of the presentation that I gave. Maybe it went a little too long, but I'm really glad you got to meet Marjorie. I don't think the other group's going to get to meet her, but maybe I can figure out how to take a little tiny bit of our class and play a little bit of that for them. It's just not the same thing though as having her present with us. And I appreciate the conversation here. So for next time, we will have presentations on the rest of Suchocki's book. And I look forward to that. So thank you again. Bye-bye.
Hi,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. So Amber, if you want to stay on for a second.
Dr. Russell, you made me jealous sitting outside. And I was hearing all, the outside and the wind, and I'm sitting at my table and I'm looking at outside like I want to be there too.
Yeah. Yeah, well, if you can be there, sometimes people are outside at other classes that I teach. It's just really nice to be outside, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Okay, comments?
I thought it went really well.
Yeah.
It was a little awkward there when they were going to have to discuss on their own, but that's good. I mean, you need time to think and put things together. So I think actually it worked really well having them all talk together. We got a lot of good input, I thought.
Yeah, that was nice. Yeah. I mean, the next, like tomorrow, I doubt Marjorie's gonna be able to come in for that one again, but I'll ask her. But it was just so delightful, and that was really nice. I really liked that, and it seemed like everybody really liked it too.
Yeah.
So, so the presentation, was it okay?
I thought so.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. So, you're welcome to not make it next time. I mean, I know this is a busy time for you, so I appreciate your being present and doing a lot of the grading, at least attending to and noting who wrote what and
Sure.
who responded and all of that. Appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, no problem.
All right.
Anything else you want me to prepare for next time? Because I think it's 2 weeks yet before the environmental thing, right?
Yes, that's right. So for next time, they're going to be giving their presentations. So what's helpful is actually to get some feedback about how you think their presentations went. And we'll see how the first ones go. Usually people are pretty good at doing their presentations. even if they're not perfect, like because they want to do a good job and in front of people, right? So, but if there's some way that I can make that assignment more clear or better, I'm happy to do that for the next time I teach the class.
Okay.
And it will probably be in person. Although I do like the idea of having some things online, like it'd be nice to have that lecture with the PowerPoint already done and online, and so people could watch it whenever they wanted to, and then come together for a half hour, an hour, and have a conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Okay. All right. Well, and I will talk to you. Do you think you'll come in tomorrow, or?
Probably not. I'll just use it for work time.
Yeah, good. But you'll grade the discussions.
Yes, I've already started on, I've
Yeah.
gone through both classes. I need to go back through the second class.
Yeah, because they might have some respondents that will come later.
Right.
And I think Tareya was gonna post a response, and I don't know, she was concerned about her grade. I'm not sure why she said her grade dropped to a B+, and she wasn't sure what happened.
Well, she didn't post for these last two.
She didn't post at all?
No.
Well, that's really strange, because she asked me like this morning.
Well, so I graded at 8 a.m. this morning, and then or between 8 and 8:30. So
maybe she might have posted something before the class.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you want me to go ahead and
responded.
do you want me to go ahead and count points for the initial post then, since it was after the due date or due time?
That's fine. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Will do.
Okay.
All right.
See you later.
Have a good evening.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Bye.